At first, Millie didn't want to tell anyone about the black lizard she'd found in the forest. But when it started to look sick a few days later, she realized she had no choice. She had to bring it to a vet. What she didn't expect, though, was just how extreme the vet's reaction would be. As soon as he saw the lizard, he panicked, and suddenly everything changed. Millie was still frozen in place, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The moment she opened the terrarium and showed the vet the black lizard, his eyes widened in shock. Without saying much, he jumped back and yelled for Millie and her dad to move away from it. They both backed up, confused and alarmed, but the vet wasn't explaining anything. Instead, he pulled out his phone, made a call, and quickly stepped out of the room, clearly not wanting them to hear what he was saying. Millie's heart was racing. She was terrified the vet was going to take her beloved lizard away. With a reaction like that, she couldn't help but think something was seriously wrong. Part of her just wanted to grab the terrarium and run, but her dad gently stopped her. He understood how much this meant to her, but he also knew they had to listen to the expert. Running wouldn't help. They needed to stay calm and find out what was going on. Not long after, the vet came back into the room with a tense look on his face. What he told them next shook Millie to the core. She had no idea what kind of animal she had brought home from the forest, but the vet knew exactly what it was. He stared at the creature like he couldn't believe it was really there. It wasn't even supposed to exist in this part of the world, let alone show up in his clinic. He admitted it was way beyond anything he could deal with, so he had contacted a group of specialists, and they were already on their way. But before they arrived, they needed to ask Millie and her dad some serious questions. What exactly had Millie brought out of the forest? Was this lizard a danger to her? And why had it shaken the vet so much? Millie had always loved exploring the forest. Ever since she was little, she'd been drawn to nature, especially the animals that lived in it. For her, there was no better place to discover something new than out among the trees. But what she didn't realize was that today, she was about to stumble upon something that no one ever expected to find there. And this one moment was about to change everything for her. Usually, Millie would head into the woods with her mom, dad, or another adult. After all, she was only 9 years old, and you never knew what might be out there. But today, she went exploring on her own. Her parents were both busy, and even though they weren't sure about it, Millie was determined. Her dad, especially, felt bad about keeping her from doing what she loved. He had always encouraged her to be outside and connect with nature, and deep down, he believed she was ready for a little more independence. Millie knew those woods like the back of her hand, and she'd shown him plenty of times that she was careful and smart when she was out there. The bigger problem was convincing her mom. Anastasia, Millie's mother, thought the idea of letting a child wander the forest alone was completely out of the question. She'd always been extremely protective when it came to her daughter. Anastasia worried a lot more than her husband, Michael. If anything were to happen to Millie out there alone, she knew she'd never forgive herself. But somehow, some way, Michael managed to convince her. What really tipped the scale was how much Millie clearly wanted to go. Anastasia realized she couldn't keep her little girl indoors forever. Still, part of her wondered if maybe she should have. The forest wasn't far from their home, so Millie could walk there easily. She practically skipped the whole way, her basket swinging in one hand and a few empty glass jars clinking inside. She was all smiles, excited to spend the whole afternoon exploring and collecting bugs. But everything changed the moment she came across one very strange creature. After that, she didn't care about the bugs or the trees or anything else anymore. Millie had been out there for about 2 hours, and everything had been going perfectly. She probably hadn't stopped smiling the entire time. She'd taken what felt like 1,000 pictures and had seen all kinds of small, adorable animals. But then she spotted something that didn't fit in at all. It stood out sharply against the soft green of the forest. It wasn't cute, and Millie had never seen anything like it before. Whatever it was completely black, darker than anything she'd ever seen in nature. At first, she hesitated. She had no idea what kind of animal this was, and it might be dangerous. She thought about turning around and just walking away, like her parents had taught her. No risk, no trouble. But something stopped her. The longer she looked at the strange creature, the more curious she became. She couldn't help herself. She needed to get a closer look. But even up close, she still couldn't figure out what it was. It looked kind of like a lizard, but not one she recognized. In all the years she'd been coming to this forest, she had never seen a single lizard of any kind. And she remembered why. Her dad had told her once that this area wasn't warm or dry enough for big lizards to live in. That thought instantly made her worry. If it didn't belong here, how was it surviving? One of the jars she had with her was still empty. Maybe, she thought, she could catch the lizard and take it home. She didn't know much about how to care for something like this, but she figured she could look it up online. It might have a better chance with her than left out here in a place that clearly wasn't right for it. And so, Millie made what would turn out to be a very big mistake. She decided to take the lizard with her. She quickly stuffed some moss and a few leaves into the jar, which luckily already had small holes in the lid for air. Then she slowly crept toward the creature, which hadn't moved at all. Millie was so focused she started to sweat. Just a few more inches. Just a little closer. And then, in one quick move, she scooped the lizard off the tree and sealed the lid on the jar in seconds. That's when the lizard finally moved, and it didn't like being trapped. It squirmed and twisted violently, bumping against the glass like it was trying to break free. Millie could feel the jar shaking in her hand, and it startled her enough to shove it into her backpack right away. Maybe the animal would calm down faster if it was in the dark. Millie figured it might think it was nighttime or something. She didn't know that lizards were mostly nocturnal, but that didn't really matter. What mattered was getting it home. Fast. On the way back, Millie tried to look up what kind of lizard she'd found. She assumed there couldn't be that many black lizards in the world, and that identifying it would be easy. But there was no internet until she finally made it out of the woods. And when her phone did connect, she found out there were actually tons of black lizards. She scrolled through picture after picture, but nothing looked like the one she had. When she got home, her parents were clearly relieved to see her. She'd been gone for quite a while, even though that had been the plan. It's still not easy for parents when they don't know exactly where their 9-year-old daughter is for that long. They asked how it went, and if she'd seen anything interesting. Millie hesitated. She really wanted to ask for help with the lizard, but deep down she knew her parents probably wouldn't be happy that she had brought home a wild animal they knew nothing about. So she decided not to say anything, at least not yet. She figured it'd be better to learn more about it first. She smiled and told them she had a great day, but was really tired and wanted to relax in her room for a bit. Her parents were totally fine with that. They still had plenty of work to get done themselves. As soon as Millie closed her bedroom door behind her, she took the jar with the black lizard out of her backpack and set it on her desk. The creature had calmed down and was now resting on the soft bed of moss and leaves she had made. It seemed fine for now, but Millie knew that wouldn't last. It would need food, water, and definitely a bigger space to live in. And soon. Luckily, she remembered that her parents had an old fish tank stored up in the attic, and since they were both busy downstairs, this was the perfect time to sneak up and get it. After carrying the tank to her room, Millie quietly climbed out through the roof window so her parents wouldn't see her. She dropped into the garden and gathered moss, leaves, twigs, anything she could use to make the tank feel like a proper home for the lizard. Millie had also looked up what lizards usually ate and was relieved to find out they mostly ate bugs. She still had all the ones she'd collected earlier that day, before finding the lizard. She felt a little bad for the poor bugs, but at this point, keeping the lizard alive seemed more important. at least until she figured out what exactly it was. Later, she climbed back into the house and got to work. She set up the terrarium, added a small bowl of water, and carefully tried to move the lizard from the jar into the tank. She was still nervous. What if its skin was poisonous? What if it bit her? She had no idea. But the transfer went smoothly. She dropped in a few live bugs and quickly sealed the top of the tank. The lizard started to move around slowly, then settled in. It actually looked kind of content. But now Millie had a bigger problem to deal with. What was she going to do next? She couldn't keep a secret pet like this forever. Millie needed to take a step back and figure out what she really wanted to do next. The first thing on her list was getting more information, especially to find out if this lizard could be dangerous. But that was proving hard since she still couldn't find the exact same lizard anywhere online. What she could find, though, was a lot of general info and warnings about lizards in general. Out of everything she read, two things stood out and gave her some peace of mind. First, she learned that most lizards rarely bite, and especially the small ones, like hers, usually didn't have the kind of teeth that could even break human skin. That helped. The second thing was about color. Apparently, lizards and other reptiles that were dangerous or toxic usually had bright, flashy colors. Since her lizard was the complete opposite, just deep, dark black, Millie felt pretty sure it wasn't poisonous. That made her feel way better about having brought it home. In fact, she even felt confident enough to pick it up out of the tank and gently hold it for a while. She gave it a name, Sirius, after her favorite Harry Potter character, Sirius Black, and from that moment on, she started to feel a real bond with it. Days went by, and Millie's parents had no idea about her secret. The only thing they noticed was that she was suddenly spending a lot more time in her room, which was unusual for her. Millie had always been the kind of kid who wanted to be outside. It struck them as a little odd, but not enough to raise any alarms yet. They'd go into her room now and then and never saw anything suspicious. Millie had tucked the homemade terrarium under her desk, hidden away from sight, at least for now. At first, everything seemed fine, but then Millie noticed some troubling changes. Sirius was becoming less active. He stopped moving around much, didn't seem interested in the bugs anymore, and she couldn't tell if he was even drinking water. Millie didn't know a lot about reptiles, but she knew this couldn't be good. She started to wonder if maybe the setup she'd made just wasn't right for him. A lizard like this probably needed a warmer, more humid climate, something closer to tropical. But Millie had no idea how to recreate that in her small bedroom. Online, people recommended using a heat lamp or a special warming light. Millie had looked up the prices, but they were way out of her budget. She didn't have nearly enough pocket money saved up. Now she had a hard choice to make. But deep down, she knew the right thing to do. Saving the lizard had to come first, even if it meant getting in trouble. She was scared, no doubt about it. Her stomach was in knots. But Millie finally made up her mind. It was time to tell her parents. With her hands shaking and the tank held carefully in her arms, she walked into the living room. Her mom, Anastasia, was in the kitchen, focused on cooking, and didn't notice right away what Millie was carrying. Michael wasn't home yet. He was still at work. Anastasia turned down the heat on one of the pots and turned around to smile at her daughter, but the smile didn't last. Her eyes landed on the tank. First, she just looked surprised that Millie had somehow managed to drag the old fish tank down from the attic. That alone raised a few questions. But then she noticed something moving inside it. And when she looked up at her daughter's face and saw how upset she looked, her expression changed completely. Anastasia looked at her daughter and gently asked what was wrong, but the more Millie tried to speak, the more her eyes filled with tears. No words would come out. She just stood there, holding the tank tightly in her arms, heart pounding. Anastasia took a few quick steps forward to get a better look at what Millie was carrying. Inside the tank, she saw moss, bark, and even a small bowl of water. Millie had clearly built some kind of terrarium. But for what? Then something inside the tank suddenly moved. Anastasia jumped back with a startled yelp. Her eyes shot to the movement, and finally she spotted the small black creature inside. It was a lizard, unlike anything she'd ever seen. Millie was now more nervous than ever. This was it, the moment she had to convince her very cautious mother that bringing the creature home was the right thing to do, that they needed to help it now. Anastasia looked at Millie with a firm expression. "Well," she said, "are you going to explain what's going on here?" Millie took a deep breath and swallowed hard, trying to push her nerves aside. With a slight stutter, she started to explain. She told her mom she had found the lizard alone in the forest, and it looked like it wasn't supposed to be out there. She said it would have died if she hadn't helped it. She also claimed she had been really careful when handling it, even though, deep down, she knew that wasn't entirely true. Anastasia listened quietly, her expression unreadable. Millie could tell her mom was torn. On one hand, she had always been clear. Millie wasn't supposed to bring home wild animals, especially ones she didn't recognize. This had been a serious rule, and Millie had gone against it. But on the other hand, her daughter had done it out of kindness, and maybe even bravery. She had clearly tried to protect the animal the best way she knew how. As Anastasia stood there, unsure of what to say next, the front door opened. Michael walked in, home from work and still in a great mood. He walked into the living room, and the second he spotted the fish tank and the lizard inside, his face lit up. Michael had always been a huge fan of nature. He loved animals, especially unusual ones. And the fact that he didn't recognize this one only made it more exciting for him. He walked right over to the tank, eyes wide with curiosity. Anastasia looked at her husband and instantly knew it was going to be hard to stay strict when he was this thrilled. She decided that if Millie was going to face any consequences, they could talk about that later, after everything calmed down. For now, they needed to focus on the situation at hand. She told Millie this, and the girl nearly collapsed in relief. Then they got straight to the real question: what were they going to do now? Millie hadn't brought the lizard downstairs just to show it off. She explained that her lizard, whom she had named Sirius, wasn't doing well. He had stopped eating and drinking, and he wasn't moving around like he had the first few days. Millie was sure he was sick, or at least struggling in some way. She told her parents they needed to take Sirius to a vet, and soon, before things got worse. But Michael had a different opinion. His first thought was that the lizard had already managed to survive out there in their local climate. Michael pointed out that the lizard had seemed fine before. He only started going downhill after Millie captured him and kept him in a small glass tank. It wasn't unusual for wild animals to shut down or lose energy when they were suddenly trapped in tight spaces. Maybe this lizard didn't need a vet at all. Maybe what it really needed was to be released back into the wild where it belonged. Millie realized that her dad had a point. That was something she hadn't thought about yet. But still, what if she was right and the lizard really did need help? Her parents clearly weren't planning on taking any further steps. If something was going to be done, she'd have to be the one to make it happen. So she made an offer that caught both her parents off guard. It was clear how strongly she cared about this animal. Millie said she'd pay for the vet visit with her own money, every cent if needed, if they would just take her and the lizard. And if the vet said the lizard was healthy, she'd release it back into the forest, no questions asked. Michael warned her that it might cost her everything she had. And if the lizard needed any kind of treatment, she could even end up owing more. But Millie didn't flinch. She had already made up her mind. Her parents had to admire that kind of determination. Anastasia still wasn't thrilled about the idea of her daughter spending all her savings on this, but Michael was more supportive. It didn't take long for him to convince his wife to let Millie do this. Anastasia could see how important it was to her daughter, and that saying no now might be the real mistake. Michael called the vet's office to ask if they could squeeze in an appointment that same day. As luck would have it, the vet had a small opening later that afternoon. He expected it would just be a quick check, 10 minutes at most. But he had no idea what was really coming his way. With a couple of hours still to go before the appointment, Michael and Millie decided to spend the time doing some more research and taking a closer look at the lizard. Michael was smart enough to grab a pair of gloves before handling it, something Millie realized she probably should have done a lot sooner. But she had to stick to her story that she'd been super careful the whole time. Once they got the lizard out of the tank, it actually seemed a little more lively. Michael held it gently but firmly, though it kept squirming and fighting to break free. It even managed to escape his hands once. But thankfully, they had chosen the locked bathroom for this exact reason, so there was nowhere for it to run too far. Watching all this, Michael's theory seemed more likely. Maybe the lizard just didn't belong in captivity. Millie started to feel a knot in her stomach. What if her dad was right? What if she spent all her money only for the vet to say there was nothing wrong? Then she'd have to let Sirius go anyway, just like they'd agreed. But it was too late to back out now. She had to stay confident and trust that she'd made the right choice. So they gently placed the lizard back into the tank and got ready to leave for the vet. The car ride was rough for Millie. She couldn't stop staring at Sirius, who was now twitching and jolting around inside the glass tank. He probably had no idea what was going on, why everything around him seemed to move while he wasn't moving himself. Millie had seen their cat do the exact same thing during car rides. Millie just hoped that this whole trip wasn't going to stress Sirius out too much. She knew car rides and unfamiliar places could be tough on animals. When they arrived at the vet's office, she and Michael were told they'd have to wait a little while. The vet was still in the middle of a procedure that was running longer than expected. Neither of them minded. In fact, Millie was a little relieved. It gave Sirius a bit more time to settle down before his checkup. A calm lizard would definitely be easier for the vet to examine than one that was bouncing around with nerves. About 30 minutes later, they were finally called into the office. The vet looked tired, completely worn out, really. It was already past closing time, and Millie was his last appointment of the day. It was clear he was hoping for a quick in and out so he could go home. But the moment he got a good look at the lizard, everything changed. Millie would never forget the look on his face. As soon as he put on his glasses and leaned in for a closer look at the small black lizard, his eyes suddenly widened. It was like something clicked in his head. The exhaustion vanished in an instant, replaced by a burst of adrenaline. He jolted backward from the tank and shouted at Millie and Michael to get away. Now. The sudden shift stunned both of them, but they listened, stepping back quickly, just like he told them. They were shocked, confused, and desperate for answers. But before they could ask anything, the vet grabbed the glass box with Sirius inside and rushed out of the room. Millie instinctively moved to follow him, but Michael gently held her back. He didn't like any of this either, but he knew they couldn't just run after the vet. They had to wait, no matter how uncomfortable it felt. So they waited. For nearly 20 tense minutes, Millie and her dad sat quietly, listening to the sounds coming from the other room. They could hear the vet talking on the phone, and though they couldn't make out the words, his voice sounded shaky. That alone told them that something serious was going on, and it probably wasn't good. After about 15 minutes of complete silence, the vet finally returned, but this time he no longer had the lizard with him. Millie immediately stood up, her heart racing. She demanded to know where Sirius was and what the vet had done with him. But the vet didn't answer right away. Instead, he said they'd need to answer some questions first. Michael stepped in to calm Millie down. With some effort, he helped her sit back down so they could try to get some answers the right way. Millie did her best to explain everything. She told the vet exactly where she had found the lizard, how she had taken care of it, what she had fed it, and even admitted, though nervously, that she had handled it directly with her hands. Millie admitted she had handled the animal with her bare hands. That got a headshake from the vet and a disappointed look from her dad. Michael had clearly believed her when she said she'd been careful. If the lizard had been poisonous, who knew what kind of danger she could have been in? But the vet quickly eased their worries. He seemed satisfied with Millie's answers, and for the first time since they arrived, even looked a bit relieved. He explained that Millie wasn't in any danger. The lizard could only be slightly poisonous if it bit someone, and since that hadn't happened, she was in the clear. Then the vet explained that he had contacted animal control, and they were on their way to pick up the lizard. They should be arriving any minute. Millie's face fell again. She couldn't believe Sirius was being taken away. But this time, the vet had a solid reason, and he made sure to explain everything. He told them he had recognized the lizard the moment he saw it. In fact, any vet in the area would have known what it was. That's because, about a week ago, a notice had gone out to every vet, animal shelter, and wildlife agency nearby, asking them to be on the lookout for this exact lizard. The reason? Sirius wasn't just any lizard. He was part of a rare and endangered species. There were none left in the wild, and only a handful were still alive anywhere in the world. Those few were kept in special breeding programs with the hope of saving the species from extinction. And Sirius had escaped from one of those programs, specifically the one run by the university near where Millie lived. He wasn't just any lizard, he was the only male they had. It was absolutely vital that they got him back. But the university had lost hope, assuming he'd never be found again in the vast forest. The fact that Millie not only discovered him, but actually caught him and kept him safe? It was a 1-in-a-million miracle. Millie and Michael could hardly believe what they were hearing. But suddenly, letting go of Sirius didn't hurt quite so much. It was clear he wasn't meant to be someone's pet or to stay out in the wild. He had a much more important job, to help save his entire species. And thanks to Millie, that was now possible. She was even rewarded for it. The university offered to pay for her first 2 years of college if she chose to attend there in the future. And of course, she didn't have to pay a single cent for the vet visit either. If you enjoyed this amazing true story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. You never know what wild adventure might be coming next.